He thought she didn't belong in a room like this, but he had no idea he was about to be judged by the one person who owned the entire night. The chandelier light shimmered across the marble floors of the Grand Regent Ballroom, casting golden reflections on crystal glasses and polished shoes as the city's most powerful figures gathered for the annual private gala, an invitation-only event whispered about in boardrooms and country clubs alike, where million-dollar deals were signed between sips of aged whiskey and quiet nods carried more weight than contracts. And tonight, every detail had been curated to perfection, from the string quartet playing near the balcony to the velvet ropes guiding guests into the exclusive VIP lounge. Yet amidst the tailored suits and designer gowns, Claire Whitmore stepped through the entrance almost unnoticed, her soft gray dress falling simply to her knees, her shoes unbranded, her presence quiet in a way that seemed almost deliberate, as if she had chosen not to compete with the room, but to observe it instead, her eyes steady, her posture relaxed. And for a moment she paused just inside the doorway, taking in the scene not with awe but with calm recognition, like someone who had seen rooms like this before and knew exactly what they revealed about the people inside them. But the staff at the front didn't see that. They saw only what they expected to see, a woman who didn't quite match the standard of wealth they had been trained to recognize. And within seconds the subtle shift began, a glance exchanged between two attendants. A tight smile that didn't reach the eyes, a hesitation, before greeting her that stretched just long enough to be felt, not heard. And when Claire stepped forward, offering her name with quiet clarity, the young man at the check-in tablet barely looked up before scanning the screen with exaggerated slowness, his fingers tapping once, twice, then pausing as his brow furrowed, not in confusion but in assumption, and behind him another staff member leaned closer, whispering something just low enough to avoid attention, but loud enough to carry intent. The kind of whisper that builds walls without raising voices. And Claire stood there, hands loosely folded, her expression unchanged, as the seconds stretched into something heavier, something that began to draw the attention of nearby guests who turned just slightly, curious, sensing the tension before understanding it. And then it came, the polite dismissal wrapped in practiced professionalism. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I don't see your name on the list." The words delivered smoothly, almost kindly, but with an edge that suggested finality, as if the conversation had already ended before it began. And for a moment the room seemed to lean in, waiting to see how she would respond. But Claire didn't argue, didn't defend herself, didn't reach for proof or raise her voice. Instead, she simply met his gaze, calm and unshaken. And in that stillness, there was something unexpected, something that didn't fit the role they had already assigned her, something that made the air feel just slightly heavier, though no one could quite explain why. And somewhere in the distance a glass clinked, a laugh echoed. Life in the ballroom continued as if nothing had happened, yet around Claire a quiet space began to form, not empty, but watchful, as if the night itself had paused, waiting for something unseen to arrive. The young man at the check-in tablet shifted his weight, glancing briefly toward his colleague before forcing a tighter smile that carried less courtesy than before, as if Claire's silence had unsettled him in ways he did not fully understand. And behind him the second staff member straightened her posture, stepping forward with the confidence of someone used to enforcing invisible boundaries, her voice smoother but firmer as she spoke. "If you do not have a confirmed registration, I am afraid we cannot grant access to the main floor." And the words were polite, carefully measured, yet unmistakably dismissive, drawing a clearer line now between those who belonged and those who did not. And a few nearby guests began to slow their conversations, their attention drifting toward the interaction with quiet curiosity, some with subtle smirks, others with mild discomfort. Because everyone in that room understood the unspoken rules, and everyone knew what it meant when someone was quietly turned away. But Claire did not move, her hands still relaxed, her gaze steady, and for a brief moment the staff member hesitated, as if expecting resistance, expecting a protest that would justify escalating the situation, yet none came, and that absence of reaction seemed to create a different kind of tension, one that did not fit the usual script, because there was no embarrassment in Claire's posture, no urgency in her tone when she finally spoke. Again, her voice calm and even, "Perhaps you should check again." And it was not a demand, not even a challenge, just a simple suggestion delivered without emotion, which somehow made it more difficult to dismiss. But the young man shook his head quickly, almost too quickly, tapping the screen again as if to prove his point. "I have already checked, ma'am, and this is a private event," he added, emphasizing the last words slightly, as though repeating them would reinforce their authority. A faint ripple of quiet laughter passed between two guests standing a few feet away, the kind of restrained amusement that feeds on discomfort, and the staff member beside him took a small step closer to Claire, lowering her voice just enough to sound discreet, while still making sure others could hear the implication. "We have had situations before where individuals attempt to enter without proper clearance, so we do need to be careful." And there it was, the suggestion wrapped in professionalism. The assumption spoken without being fully stated, and the air around them seemed to tighten, the space between Claire and the staff now clearly defined, as if an invisible barrier had been drawn. And still, Claire did not react the way they expected. She did not defend her presence, did not reach for identification, did not explain herself. Instead, she simply looked at them with a quiet, measured calm that made the moment stretch longer than it should have. And in that pause, something subtle shifted, not in the room, but in perception, because a few of the onlookers began to notice the difference, the lack of discomfort, the absence of apology, the way she stood as if she had nowhere else to be and nothing to prove, and it unsettled them in ways they could not quite name, while the staff, sensing the attention growing, grew more rigid, more determined to resolve the situation quickly, to restore the order they were responsible for maintaining. And the woman finally gestured lightly toward the exit with a practiced motion, her tone firm now. "I am going to have to ask you to step aside so we can continue checking in our registered guests." And the sentence landed with quiet finality, a polite dismissal delivered in front of witnesses, the kind that left no room for argument without creating a scene. And for a second, the ballroom noise seemed to dim just enough, as if the moment had reached its edge, waiting for something to break. But Claire only nodded once, slowly, her expression unchanged, and then, almost absent-mindedly, she reached into her small handbag, not with urgency, not with frustration, but with the calm precision of someone who had already decided what would happen next. And as her fingers brushed against her phone, her eyes lifted briefly, scanning the room not with uncertainty, but with quiet certainty, as if she were not the one being evaluated at all, but the one taking note of everything. The subtle motion of Claire's hand reaching into her handbag did not go unnoticed, and the young man at the check-in tablet straightened instinctively, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if preparing for a confrontation that never came, while the staff member beside him folded her arms with restrained impatience, expecting either a hurried explanation or an awkward attempt to prove legitimacy. But Claire moved with the same unhurried composure, retrieving her phone and holding it for a moment, without looking at the screen, as if the action itself was not meant to defend her place, but to mark a quiet shift in control. And around them the low hum of conversation continued, though now threaded with glances and half-turned heads, because something about the moment refused to resolve cleanly, and people were beginning to notice, not the conflict, but the stillness within it. The way Claire seemed entirely untouched by the pressure that would have unsettled anyone else. And one guest, a man in a tailored navy suit standing near the champagne bar, leaned slightly toward his companion, whispering something under his breath, his eyes fixed not on the staff, but on Claire, as if trying to place a detail that did not quite fit. And the staff member stepped forward again, her tone tightening just enough to reassert authority. "Ma'am, if you need assistance finding another event, I can have someone escort you." And the offer, framed as help, carried the unmistakable weight of dismissal, drawing a clearer boundary now, one that expected compliance. But Claire simply unlocked her phone, her expression unchanged, her movements precise. And for a brief second the glow of the screen reflected in her eyes as she typed a short message. No hesitation, no visible emotion, just a single action completed with quiet certainty. And then she lowered the phone, slipping it back into her bag as if nothing significant had happened. And that was what made it unsettling, because there was no urgency, no sign that she felt out of place, only a calm that did not match the situation they believed they were controlling. And the young man exhaled sharply, glancing again at the tablet as though hoping it might suddenly validate his decision. But the screen remained unchanged, reinforcing the conclusion he had already committed to, and behind them another staff member approached. Drawn by the subtle tension, his voice low as he asked, "Is everything all right here?" And the woman nodded quickly, keeping her focus on Claire. "Yes, just handling it," she replied, her tone clipped now, aware that the attention had grown beyond a private exchange, and a few more guests turned openly, their conversations fading as curiosity replaced indifference, because moments like this, small as they seemed, had a way of revealing more than they should. And still Claire said nothing, did nothing to escalate or retreat. She simply stood there, her posture steady, her gaze moving briefly across the room as if observing something far beyond the immediate interaction. And then, faintly at first, something shifted at the far end of the ballroom, not loud, not disruptive, but noticeable in the way heads began to turn one by one. A subtle ripple moving through the crowd as the large double doors near the entrance opened again, and a different kind of presence entered, measured footsteps, coordinated movement, not hurried, not uncertain, and though no announcement was made, the change in atmosphere was immediate, the kind that did not need explanation, and the staff at the check-in desk felt it before they fully saw it, a tightening in posture, a glance exchanged, a quiet awareness that something had just entered the room that operated on a level beyond their authority, and Claire, without turning her head, seemed to register it instantly, her expression remaining calm, almost knowing, as if the night had just begun to reveal what it had been holding back all along. The shift in the room was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, like a change in air pressure before a storm, and conversations that had moments ago carried easily across the ballroom began to taper into shorter exchanges, voices lowering not out of instruction but instinct, as if something unspoken had entered and quietly demanded attention. And near the entrance the double doors remained open just long enough for three figures to step inside, their presence defined not by extravagance but by precision, dark tailored suits, measured posture, movements that did not seek attention yet commanded it effortlessly. And the security personnel stationed along the walls straightened almost in unison, their eyes tracking the newcomers with immediate recognition, while several guests exchanged quick glances, subtle nods, the kind reserved for people whose authority was understood without introduction. And at the check-in desk the young man felt it before he fully saw it, his fingers pausing, mid-motion above the tablet, his shoulders tightening as his colleague's confident posture faltered just slightly. And when he finally looked up, the color in his expression shifted, not dramatically, but enough to betray uncertainty, because the men approaching were not part of the usual guest list. They were not donors, not executives, not the familiar faces of wealth and influence that defined the evening. They carried something else entirely, something structured, official, and deliberate. And as they moved across the marble floor, their steps echoed just enough to cut through the lingering music, not loudly, but with a rhythm that drew attention without asking for it. And one of the staff members instinctively reached to adjust her blazer, smoothing the fabric as if preparing for a level of scrutiny she had not anticipated, while the second staff member leaned closer to the young man, whispering quickly, "Do you know who they are?" But he did not answer, because in that moment he realized that not knowing was the problem, and a quiet tension spread outward from the entrance, moving through the crowd like a ripple, guests turning more openly now, conversations pausing mid-sentence, the string quartet continuing to play but somehow sounding distant, as if the room itself had shifted focus. And through it all Claire remained exactly where she had been, her posture unchanged, her gaze calm, not turning to look, not reacting with surprise, but with the quiet stillness of someone who had been expecting this moment long before it arrived. And as the three officials approached the check-in area, their pace steady and unhurried, the woman who had moments ago been directing Claire toward the exit felt her confidence begin to thin. Her earlier authority now tempered by uncertainty she could not conceal, and she stepped forward, offering a professional smile that did not quite settle. "Good evening. Welcome to the event. May I assist you?" Her voice controlled but tighter than before, and the man at the front of the group acknowledged her with a brief nod, his expression composed, his tone measured. "We are here on behalf of the organizing committee, he said, each word clear, deliberate, carrying a weight that did not need to be raised to be felt. And the young man at the tablet glanced down instinctively, as if the screen might suddenly provide answers it had not before. But the information there felt irrelevant now, because whatever was happening had already moved beyond his control, and the official's gaze shifted past them, scanning the immediate area with quiet precision before settling, not on the staff, but directly on Claire. And in that instant the air seemed to still, the subtle tension crystallizing into something undeniable, something that made the staff realize, all at once, that the situation they believed they were managing had never truly been theirs to control. And Claire, meeting that gaze without hesitation, gave the smallest acknowledgement, a barely perceptible nod, as if confirming something already understood. And around them the room held its breath, not in anticipation of conflict, but in recognition that the balance of the night had just shifted in a way no one could reverse. For a brief moment, no one moved, and the silence that settled over the check-in area was not empty but heavy, filled with the weight of realization slowly taking shape in the minds of those who had been watching, because the official standing at the front did not look at the staff again, did not acknowledge their attempt to regain control. Instead, his attention remained fixed on Claire, and when he finally spoke, his voice was calm, measured, and unmistakably respectful. "Ms. Whitmore," he said, and the name landed differently than anything spoken before that night. Not questioned, not doubted, but recognized, and the effect was immediate. The young man at the tablet froze mid-breath, his eyes widening slightly as the name echoed in his thoughts, while the woman beside him felt her posture falter, her earlier certainty dissolving into something far less steady, because names carried weight in rooms like this. And this one had just shifted everything, and Claire responded with the smallest nod, her expression unchanged, her composure unbroken, as if this moment had always been inevitable. And the official continued, turning slightly so his words could be heard not only by her, but by those now openly watching. "We have completed the preliminary review as instructed," he said, his tone clear and precise, "and we are ready to proceed with your directive." And there was no need to raise his voice, because the room had already quieted enough for the words to carry, and the phrase itself, simple as it sounded, struck like a revelation, because it reframed the entire situation in an instant, transforming Claire from someone being evaluated into the one giving instructions. And around them the reactions unfolded in layers. A guest near the bar lowered his glass slowly, his expression shifting from curiosity to recognition. Another woman placed a hand lightly against her chest, her eyes fixed on Claire with sudden awareness, while the staff at the check-in desk stood completely still, caught between disbelief and the growing understanding that they had misread everything. And the woman who had moments ago gestured toward the exit felt a flush rise to her face, her lips parting slightly as if to speak, but no words came, because there was nothing left to say that would restore what had already been lost. And the young man glanced down at the tablet again, as if it might somehow contradict what he had just heard. But the device now felt meaningless, a tool designed for a version of reality that no longer applied. And Claire, still composed, shifted her gaze briefly across the room, taking in the faces now turned toward her, the attention no longer casual but focused, the atmosphere no longer indifferent but charged with quiet realization. And then she looked back at the official, her voice steady when she spoke. "Thank you," she said simply, and there was no triumph in her tone. No need to emphasize what had just occurred, because the moment spoke for itself. And the official inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement before stepping just half a pace to the side, a subtle gesture that placed Claire at the center of the interaction without announcement. And in that movement the hierarchy of the room rearranged itself completely, not through force, not through volume, but through recognition, and the staff felt it most of all. The shift from authority to accountability settling over them with quiet certainty, as the realization became impossible to ignore, that the person they had dismissed, redirected, and quietly humiliated had never been outside the system at all. She had been above it, observing it, and now, finally, revealing exactly what it had shown her. "No." One spoke immediately after Claire's quiet acknowledgement, and in that silence the weight of what had just been revealed settled deeper into the room, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a certainty that could not be undone, and the official standing beside her turned slightly, addressing the others in his group with a brief nod before one of them stepped forward, holding a slim folder with deliberate care, the kind of movement that signaled purpose rather than performance, and he spoke. Clearly, his tone even but firm enough to carry across the now attentive space. As directed, we have completed a full evaluation of guest experience protocols, staff conduct, and access procedures for this event, and though the words sounded procedural, their timing transformed them into something far more personal, because everyone understood now that this was not a routine report, this was a response. And the staff at the check-in desk felt it immediately, their earlier confidence replaced by a stillness that bordered on disbelief, as if they were trying to reconcile the interaction they had just had with the reality now unfolding in front of them. And the woman who had asked Claire to step aside lowered her gaze briefly, her hands clasping together more tightly than before, her posture no longer projecting authority but restraint, while the young man beside her swallowed hard, his attention fixed forward, no longer checking the tablet, no longer searching for validation, because the validation had already arrived, and it was not in his favor, and Claire remained composed, her presence steady, not stepping forward to claim attention, not raising her voice to emphasize the shift, but simply standing as the center of it, allowing the moment to unfold without interference. And that restraint carried its own power, because it made everything else in the room adjust around her, not the other way around. And the official continued. There were specific instructions to observe. Interactions without interference, he said, his gaze briefly scanning the staff before returning to Claire, and to document any deviations from expected professional standards. And the phrasing was careful, measured, but its implication was unmistakable, and a subtle murmur moved through the nearby guests, not loud enough to disrupt the silence, but enough to signal understanding, because what had been perceived as a simple misunderstanding was now revealed as something far more deliberate, and the staff could feel it in the way eyes had shifted toward them, not with curiosity now, but with quiet judgment, the kind that lingers longer than any spoken criticism. And Claire's gaze moved calmly across the scene, not lingering on any one person, not seeking reaction, but taking in the atmosphere as it had transformed, the same room, the same people, yet entirely different in how it now responded to her presence. And then, after a brief pause that seemed to stretch longer than it should, she spoke again, her voice soft but clear. "And what did you find?" she asked, not with accusation, not with expectation, but with a calm that made the question feel less like a challenge and more like a conclusion waiting to be confirmed. And the official met her gaze without hesitation, his answer immediate. "We found that initial assessments were made based on appearance rather than verification," he said, each word deliberate, "and that access decisions did not reflect the standards outlined in your directive, and the clarity of it left no room for interpretation, no space for deflection. And in that moment the room did not react with noise or confrontation, it simply absorbed the truth of it, quietly, completely, and the staff stood still within it, understanding without being told that the night had shifted beyond recovery, not because of punishment, not because of force, but because the roles they had assumed had been reversed in a way that exposed everything they had relied on. And Claire, standing in the center of that realization, did not need to say anything more for the message to be understood. The words settled into the room with a quiet finality that no one could interrupt, and for a moment the only sound that remained was the distant echo of the string quartet, now softer, almost irrelevant against the weight of what had just been said. And the staff at the entrance stood motionless, their earlier authority reduced to something fragile, something uncertain, as if the foundation they had relied on had quietly disappeared beneath them. And the woman who had directed Claire toward the exit finally found her voice, though it came carefully, measured. "Ms. Whitmore, I apologize if there has been a misunderstanding," she began, her tone shifting from control to restraint, each word chosen with visible effort. But Claire did not respond immediately, her gaze steady, not cold, not harsh, but clear in a way that made the apology feel incomplete before it had even finished. And around them the guests watched more openly now, no longer pretending not to notice. Because the moment had moved beyond subtlety. It had become something instructive, something that revealed more about the room than any speech ever could, and the official beside Claire remained silent, allowing the exchange to unfold, his presence alone reinforcing the shift that had already taken place. And the young man at the tablet lowered his eyes briefly, his hands now resting still at his sides, no longer pretending to check information, no longer searching for authority to stand behind, because there was none left to claim. And Claire finally spoke, her voice calm, her tone even. "There was no misunderstanding," she said, and the simplicity of it carried more weight than any accusation, because it did not challenge their actions, it confirmed them. And the words seemed to settle deeper than anything the officials had stated, because they came not from observation, but from experience. And the woman's expression tightened slightly, her posture adjusting as if trying to recover ground that was no longer there. "We were following protocol," she added, though the confidence in her voice had diminished, replaced by something closer to justification than certainty. And Claire held her gaze for a moment, not with confrontation, but with quiet clarity. "Then the protocol needs to change," she replied, and the statement was not raised, not emphasized, yet it carried through the room with unmistakable force, because it shifted the focus away from individuals and onto something larger, something systemic, and the guests nearest to them exchanged subtle glances, the kind that signaled agreement without words, because they had seen it before, the quiet filtering of people based on assumptions, the unspoken hierarchy that dictated access long before verification ever did, and now it had been exposed in a way that could not be ignored, and the official inclined his head slightly, acknowledging her words before turning his attention back to the staff. "Immediate adjustments will be implemented," he said, his tone steady, "and personnel assignments will be reviewed accordingly." And though the statement remained professional, its implication was clear enough to be understood without elaboration, and the staff absorbed it in silence, their earlier certainty replaced by the quiet realization that the night had changed in a way that would extend far beyond this moment. And Claire, having said what needed to be said, did not linger in the tension. She simply shifted her posture slightly, her attention moving past the interaction as if the outcome had already been decided long before anyone else recognized it. And in that movement the room adjusted again, not dramatically, not loudly, but with a subtle awareness that the person they had dismissed had not raised her voice, had not demanded recognition, yet had altered everything simply by allowing the truth to reveal itself. And for those watching, the lesson settled in silence, not spoken, but unmistakably understood. The statement did not echo, yet it lingered, settling into every corner of the ballroom as if the walls themselves had absorbed it. And for a brief moment no one attempted to move past it, because there was nothing left to challenge, nothing left to reinterpret, only the quiet certainty that something fundamental had just been exposed. And the staff at the entrance remained still, their earlier composure replaced by a careful stillness, as though any sudden movement might draw more attention to what had already unfolded, while the guests, no longer pretending indifference, began to shift subtly, their attention no longer fixed on the incident itself, but on Claire, not with curiosity now, but with recognition, the kind that changes how a person is seen without a single word needing to be said. And the official standing beside her gave a slight nod to his colleagues, signaling the completion of something that had been set in motion long before the evening began. And one of them quietly stepped back, speaking into a small earpiece with measured precision, coordinating adjustments that would ripple through the event beyond what anyone present could immediately see. And Claire, having said what needed to be said, did not remain at the center of the tension. She simply stepped forward, past the check-in desk, her movement unhurried, her posture unchanged, as if the barrier that had once stood there had never existed at all. And this time, no one stopped her, no one questioned her presence. The same space that had moments ago resisted her now opened without hesitation, not because it had been forced, but because it had been redefined. And as she moved into the main floor, the subtle shift in atmosphere followed her, conversations pausing briefly as she passed, heads turning with quiet acknowledgement, the room adjusting not out of obligation, but out of understanding. And near the champagne bar, the man in the navy suit who had watched earlier straightened slightly, offering a small nod as she approached, a gesture of respect that carried more sincerity than any formal greeting. And Claire acknowledged it just as simply, without slowing her pace. Her attention moving across the room with calm awareness, as if she were seeing it clearly for the first time, not as it had been presented, but as it truly was. And behind her, at the entrance, the staff began to reorganize themselves, their movements more deliberate now, their interactions more measured, the unspoken lesson already influencing their behavior, not through instruction, but through realization. And the woman who had first dismissed Claire watched quietly for a moment, her expression no longer defensive, but reflective, as if replaying the interaction in her mind with a clarity that had not been there before. And the young man beside her adjusted the tablet in his hands, though now it felt less like a tool of authority and more like a reminder of how easily assumptions could replace verification. And across the ballroom the officials remained present but unobtrusive, their role no longer to intervene, but to ensure that what had been revealed would not be forgotten. And Claire, now fully within the event she had never truly been excluded from, paused near the center of the room, her gaze lifting briefly toward the chandelier above, the light reflecting softly in her eyes. And in that quiet moment, the entire evening seemed to settle into a new balance, one defined not by status or appearance, but by something far more enduring, something that had been there all along, waiting to be recognized. The evening continued, but it did not return to what it had been, because something fundamental had shifted beneath the polished surface of the ballroom, something that no amount of music or conversation could fully cover. And as Claire stood beneath the chandelier's soft glow, the light catching the quiet confidence in her expression, it became clear to those watching that her presence had never been about entry. It had been about truth. And one by one, guests who had once overlooked her now approached with measured respect, their greetings careful, their tone different, not exaggerated, not performative, but aware, as if they understood that recognition, when it came too late, had to be handled with humility. And Claire acknowledged each interaction with the same calm grace, offering polite nods, brief words, nothing more than what was necessary, because she was not there to collect attention. She was there to observe what remained after it was stripped of assumption. And across the room, the earlier tension had transformed into something quieter, something reflective. Conversations resumed, but they carried a different texture now, less dismissive, more measured, as if the lesson of the night had settled into the way people chose their words. And near the entrance, the staff continued their duties with visible care, their posture straighter, their tone more respectful, not only toward those who appeared important, but toward everyone who approached, because the line between appearance and reality had been drawn clearly in their minds, and it would not fade easily. And the woman who had once asked Claire to step aside watched from a distance, her expression no longer defensive, but thoughtful, as if she had come to understand something that no training manual had ever explained. And the young man beside her greeted the next guest with a different kind of attention, his voice steadier, his approach more deliberate, no longer relying on assumption, but on verification. And that quiet change, though small, carried more weight than any formal correction, because it was internal, lasting, and beyond instruction. And the officials who had entered earlier now stood along the edges of the room, their presence unobtrusive, their task complete, not to dominate the evening, but to ensure that what had been revealed would remain understood. And as the music continued and the night moved forward, Claire allowed herself a brief pause, her gaze drifting once more across the room, taking in the subtle transformations that had unfolded, the same space, the same people, yet changed in a way that could not be undone. And without announcement, without spectacle, she turned and began to walk toward the far side of the ballroom, her steps unhurried, her presence steady, leaving behind not silence, not tension, but something far more lasting. A quiet awareness that dignity does not need to demand recognition, it reveals itself in the moments when it is tested. And in that room, on that night, everyone had seen exactly what that looked like.